Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding a deeply fascinating philosophical clash between two wildly different visions for our technological future. On one side, we've got the Vatican's moral warnings about artificial intelligence. On the other, Palantir's relentless drive for technological hard power. It's this profound tension between ethics and infrastructure, and it's beautifully mapped out in our source text using some surprisingly familiar archetypes. So let's get into it.
Here's the agenda for our journey today. First, we'll introduce the AI conflict's key players. Then, Gandalf versus Palantir, followed by escaping App Babylon and the false prophet's inevitability. Finally, we'll hit the mark in machine profiles and wrap up with building dignity infrastructure.
Section 1. The AI conflict's key players. To really grasp this clash, the source text introduces us to these powerful archetypes. They aren't just fantasy characters, they're metaphors for how we actually handle digital power today.
First up, we have the Vatican's encyclical, basically acting as Gandalf. Gandalf represents the noble gesture of restraint. It's that voice telling us to tend the field we've been given, to respect human limits, and frankly, to resist the fantasy of total technological omnipotence. It's a direct appeal to keep our world livable and preserve our fundamental human dignity against the relentless pull of the machine.
And on the flip side, we have Palantir's manifesto, representing Babylon and the Beast. In this allegory, the Beast stands for centralized digital hard power. Think about what happens when speech, images, identity, money, military force, and predictive data are all just gathered into one massive working body. It's the ultimate dream of a single command tower reaching upward, fully integrating all of society's data.
Section 2. Gandalf versus Palantir. Let's dive a bit deeper into why Gandalf's moral appeals often hit a brick wall when faced with Palantir's concrete strategies.
The source text points out a really stark imbalance here. See, the Vatican speaks to the builder's conscience, right? Using words like truth, peace, dignity. But Palantir, they speak the language of procurement. They're offering deployment schedules, salaries, security clearances, massive budgets. A moral image might live in the heart of the software engineer, sure, but a procurement contract literally reorganizes their entire daily life. The Vatican tells the builder to remain human, but Palantir actually changes the builder's job, giving them a badge, a clear mission, and a platform.
What's absolutely fascinating here is how Palantir recruits their technical talent. The text describes how a lot of Silicon Valley engineers actually feel this underlying embarrassment about doing trivial work. Optimizing ad clicks or nudging consumer behavior on smartphones. Well, Palantir swoops in and converts that shame into what the text calls a security superego. They pull engineers away from those trivial consumer apps by offering them the grave, civilizational weight of national defense. It's this massive psychological conversion from hollow app building straight into a patriotic mission.
Section 3. Escaping App Babylon, which brings us exactly to what the text calls App Babylon and how Palantir leverages our existing smartphone habits to harden digital power.
Think about how this progression works. Consumer apps spent the last decade training our attention, vacuuming up our data and entirely normalizing invisible algorithmic ranking. Palantir basically strips away the toy layer of that app culture, the social media feed, that becomes the military dashboard. The consumer profile turns into the security risk object, and those friendly algorithmic recommendations, they become literal military targeting logic.
So the absolutely crucial point is asking this exact question. As these systems evolve from consumer apps into integrated weapons and state systems, who is actually gaining the ultimate authority? Does the technology move power downward and outward into public control, education, and care? Or does it move power upward into centralized command? Ultimately, the answer lives in the architecture we built, not just the ethics we talk about.
Section 4. The false prophet's inevitability. Now, as power concentrates at the top, the text introduces another key archetype, the false prophet. This is the voice that makes the beast sound incredibly responsible. To be clear, the false prophet isn't a literal person. It's the rhetoric of inevitability. It's that voice constantly insisting that AI weapons and mass surveillance systems are going to be built anyway. By framing these technologies as inevitable destiny, this voice brilliantly shifts the entire moral debate. We stop asking, shall this be built? And we just start asking, who gets to build it? It manages to make total domination sound like a practical, adult necessity to protect Western freedom.
Because of this, the Vatican's pastoral appeal for peace suddenly becomes incredibly fragile. When the arms race has already been granted historical authority and when the public accepts that these systems are just inevitable, refusing to build them is suddenly painted as a sign of weakness or even immaturity.
The false prophet effectively neutralizes moral warnings just by making them seem hopelessly naive.
Section 5. The Mark and Machine Profiles. This sense of inevitability trickles all the way down into our daily lives through what the source text calls the mark.
In the digital age, the mark represents enforced machine legibility. Basically, it means that your access to basic life functions, stuff like work, welfare, movement, safety, money, increasingly passes through automated profiles. You hit a gate that already knows you as data. You're subjected to ratings, risk scores, and background checks. Essentially, to the system, you only exist as a machine-readable profile.
And this is where the Vatican's concept of human dignity becomes extremely concrete. The real test is whether vulnerable groups actually have the power to speak back to the machine. Think about it. A worker needs to be able to contest an automated evaluation. A welfare recipient must be able to challenge a risk score. Migrants have to question security classifications, and patients need to ask how systems ranked their need for care. If you cannot inspect the logic that governs your access to life, well, then the mark has total control.
Section 6. Building Dignity Infrastructure. To fight back against this, the explainer synthesis calls on two final archetypes to resolve the conflict: Yoda and Nehemiah. The idea here is that we have to abandon the moral hesitation of just trying to be ethical. Like Yoda famously says, do or do not, there is no try. Just trying to protect dignity while leaving the actual systems intact, that just becomes respectable delay. We have to combine Yoda's demand for action with Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah represents the shared reconstruction of the wall, many hands working together to build real, protective institutions.
So what does this wall actually look like? Ethics have to be transformed into hard public architecture. The text calls these wall sections. This means building appeal offices with real, actual authority to overturn machine decisions. It means implementing public audits and binding data rights. It means ensuring workers have collective power over algorithmic management, and creating institutional friction, what they call peace infrastructure, that physically slows down automated warfare.
And this brilliantly hits on the core message of the entire text. Dignity is not attempted, it is built. We can't just publish moral guidelines, host ethics panels, or rely on the Gandalfian gesture of noble restraint. If Palantir builds command, the response must build appeal. If they build profiles, we have to build rights against profiling. We absolutely must build actual material counterforms to the command tower.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, truly provocative thought from the source text. Against Palantir, the Vatican will remain weak until Gandalf stops being a quotation and becomes a public architecture. The question for all of us living in this AI age is pretty simple. Will our moral concerns remain just beautiful words, or are we going to pick up a brick and actually start building the wall?